Good morning and welcome to this third webinar on case writing. The topic for today's webinar is the nuances of writing a teaching case. I am Pratim Purkayastha and we will discuss the nuances of writing a teaching case in the following few minutes. So the objective for today's webinar is that after this webinar we will be able to understand the considerations in writing a teaching case that is not only interesting and useful but also one that is publishable. We will also understand what are the contents of the case and how to arrange the various sections and subsections. We will also discuss about the structure of a case, and also after this webinar you will be able to understand how to avoid copyright conflicts and also write a case with a bigger shelf life. Now, in our last webinars, we have discussed about what makes a good teaching case, and we have discussed quite thoroughly about how to make a case relevant and well researched. And we have also discussed briefly about how important it is for a case to be really well written. Writing style, how it matters a lot, and how we have to write a case with a story that catches the attention of the reader. The manner of presentation of the data is very important here, and we have to do a lot of things like including multiple perspectives and also how we should take a critical view while writing a teaching case. So here we are going to discuss this in more details, but first of all let us look at what are the content and structure of a teaching case. Now, the content of a teaching case is unique to any case. Every case is unique. So what will be the contents of the case will be determined by the objectives, teaching objectives that you have for that case. But if you are talking about some generic contents, so these are some of the things that will be there, like in any case, like the introduction, some background information. There will be various issues that are raised in the case, like we are calling these core issues here, which will be put up in certain sections and subsections, and then there will be a concluding part. There will be also some exhibits which are relevant to the case, and also the references that you have used to write the case. Now let us look at what are the considerations in each one of those sections that we have discussed. Like in the introduction, you are to introduce the case, not the company. Like many a times we see that many people start writing the case saying that this is a company, it is situated in this place and it deals with these products. Now that is not the best way of starting a case study. You are not introducing the company here. What you are introducing is what are the issues, what are the key issues in the case, what are the dilemma. So those are the ones which should be presented here. So in effect, what you are doing is that you are introducing the case. So it presents the decision setting and motivate the decision to be made. So you are talking about the main dilemma of the case here. You are talking about the challenges, if there are any, or any opportunities that have come up and how to best tap those opportunities. So you will also give some hint about the timeline covered in the case, and basically it is the crux of the case you are putting up with the dilemma so that a student can get into the soul of the decision maker and start giving start analyzing and giving some solutions or recommendations. So it can be as brief as possible. It can be one para best if you can write it in one para, or in 2 paras. Just try to keep it short. The next section will deal with some background information. So here we are giving some information relating to the company's background, or also the industry setting. So we should not be putting up the company's history here. We are not interested in the company's history as such, but all the important information that are necessary for the student to understand the context of the case. So it is like a run up to the decision dilemma, and all background information that is required to analyze the case and arrive at a decision should be put up here. So next you will have certain sections and subsections. Like here you will introduce the problem maybe, and what are the associated issues, what are the associated challenges, what are the issues that one have to look at in order to solve that problem. So there will be issues within issues, and other parts of the dilemma can be introduced in the various sections and subsections. And you can also use some tables, graphs, or boxes. You can also include the opinions of the protagonist, how he thinks, and also other key actors in the case. And maybe you can also include some expert opinions also here. So all relevant information that is required to analyze the case and arrive at a decision should be there in those sections and subsections. Now we come to the concluding part. Intentionally I have not written a conclusion there, because it is not meant to be a conclusion of the case. It is not about how the problem has been solved or you arrive at a solution here, because that is to be done in the classroom by the students along with the teacher. So here what you are doing is you are putting up a concluding part of the case, highlighting the decision dilemma once again, and probably also looking at talking about the constraints that are faced. For example, if there are some time pressures, or if some time pressures are there, by what time it has to be done, what are the specific criteria that must be met, then if there are any other requirements, or even the alternatives that the protagonist is mulling, and sometimes even some of the trade-offs associated with that. Most of the information here will be forward-looking nature. Then we can also have some tables, graphs, and notes that you would like to put to the students for analysis. So any other additional information that is required to analyze the case and arrive at a decision should be put up as these exhibits. The most important thing is that it has to be relevant to the case. Now, you can find some very good exhibits, and you may think, okay, this is something very good to put in the case. But if it is not used for analysis, then there is no point putting it there. So the most important thing here is that the relevance. Now you will also put some references, like how you have what data you have used. If you are using some, if you have conducted some interviews, probably you can write it down there with the references. If you are using secondary sources, those also you can put up as references. Now these are useful for students and even the teacher, if they wish to know more about the issue. Now these are the contents of the case. Just to give you an example, I will run you through one of my previous cases. Okay, just before that, giving that example, I will just give you also, I will also tell you about the structure of the teaching case. Now we have seen what are the contents. Now how are we going to arrange it? Now we start with the introduction, and here we talk about the time of the case and the decision. Then what we do is we go back to the background information. So you give some context there. Then you narrow it down to the issues, the sub-issues, and step by step you again come to the same point where you started, that is in the introduction, with the dilemma that is faced and what it needs to be solved. So in the concluding part you are again back to that place. The idea of having a structure like this is that in the introduction, when you are talking about a problem and asking the students for a solution, they may not be in a position to actually do what you are asking them to do, because they may not have all the information that is required. But through the various sections and subsections, as you give them more and more information, they are now in a better position to analyze those information and come out with some solution or recommendations when you are asking that question back to them at the end. So just to give you an example, I will talk about one of my previous cases. It is a case on IFC, which I was involved in the preparation, and its investment decision on a project in India, that is the Tata Mundra power plant project in Gujarat. Now here, this is the structure that I had followed. I started with an introduction where the dilemma was put up. The dilemma was essentially in front of Jim Yong Kim, the president of World Bank. Now he was faced with this dilemma because on one hand, a project like the Tata Mundra power plant was set up to give cheap electricity in a country like India where there is a need for electricity. So many communities do not have electricity even today. On the other hand, there are also accusations that this project was facing on the social and the environmental front, where some activist organizations and some communities were protesting that this was leading to social and environmental costs. Now, in such a situation, what should the president of the World Bank do? Now, this was the crux of the case. Now, how we have arranged the other sections? We have given some background information on the World Bank Group and the International Finance Corporation. Then we have given some information on the investment service of the IFC, which was involved in the investments. We have given some background on the electricity problem in India and also about the need for ultra mega power projects like Tata Mundra, which have emerged of late as for millions of people who are living without electricity. Then we have also narrowed it down to the information on the Tata Mundra project as such, and another section we have put on IFC and its involvement in the project. Now the next section starts detailing some of the problems like the environmental issues that cropped up after the plant was put into operation, and then another section on the social issues. So there we have also kept a section on the coal price hike issue, which was also a major factor that came up in this particular case, because the company was relying on coal from Indonesia, which was cheap at that point of time, but after the Tata Mundra plant was in operation, the prices were high, and as a result, Tata Mundra also wanted to increase the price what the electricity it was generating. So we had a section on that. We had the section on the complaints that the project was facing, and particularly IFC was facing from a organization called MAS. And then we have also put up the findings of the IFC's ombudsman, and then also IFC's response to the findings which were adverse. So in the concluding part, that is the looking ahead part, we have again talked about brought it back to the time when the president of World Bank was facing that problem and the associated issues, and left it to the students for discussion. We have also put up a lot of many exhibits in this case which are relevant, like ones related to financial information, maps of the plant. Then there were quantitative information on the social issues and social costs, and also some of the environmental issues and things like that. So all relevant information we have put up like that. Now this was a quite complex case, and we had to go through a lot of sections and subsections. But if your case is even simpler, the least that you will have is an introduction, some background information, at least some discussion on the core issues, and the concluding part, and some exhibits. So based on your case, you can design your how you are going to put up your content and how you are going to structure it. Now let us look at some of the considerations in writing the case. Now we have already discussed about how important it is for you to structure the case according to the objectives. We have amply discussed this in the last two webinars. So that is one thing that is very important, because this will determine what you will be putting in your case. So you have to write a story that catches the attention. So you have to write it in an engaging style. Now for that, probably you don't really need to write it with very bombastic words or very good English. Good English will do, correct English will do, even short sentences will do. In fact, you should be writing with short sentences, and it should be clear. Most important thing is that it should be clear. As long as clarity is there in your writing, I think you will be doing a good job, and rest of it is how you are structuring it. Now, you can also make the case more interesting by bringing in multiple perspectives, because otherwise the case will become polemical. If it just is with just one perspective, like the protagonist perspective, and the protagonist thinks about the issues in this way and that way, and this is all that he is thinking about, and ultimately this is his problem. Probably that may not be a very good case, in the sense that there are no other perspectives. So you have to bring in other people's perspectives as well, other actors' perspectives, the key actors, the customer's perspective, maybe even some competitors' perspective may also be useful in some cases, some industry experts' perspective, some analyst perspective. So when you are doing all those things, you are having positive as well as negative kind of information in your case. It makes it really rich and interesting. Otherwise, it becomes polemical. At the same time, when you are doing this, you have to also attribute the opinions to the people to the particular person from whom you are, or sections from whom you have gathered those information. So there should be no personal information, opinion of the author which should come into the case. So it has to be written in a very impersonal style, where one should not gauge, the reader should not guess that the writer is this way or that way, supporting something or against something. So everything has to be written in a very impersonal tone. Now you have to also take a critical view. Like, don't take information at face value. You may be getting some information saying that this is the best thing that is there, this company is the best at this, and things like that. But you have to really dig deeper. You have to look at it and corroborate it from other sources. And if you find it correct, then only you go ahead and put those information. Unless you are quoting someone, or you are properly attributing it to someone. Also, one of the considerations here is that when you are writing a teaching case, it's always good when you write it in the past tense. This is because you are writing about things that have already occurred, one, but it also at the same time makes it easier for students to relate to it, even if they are reading it after a long time. So we have already discussed how important the language that you are writing in is. So simple English is fine, correct. It should be, it's just that it should be correct English, and you can use shorter sentences. You should also try to include some direct quotes, because these direct quotes can liven up the script. Our running text can be monotonous. So when in between you put in some quotes and put it strategically in places, it can really liven up the script. Like from the protagonist, how he is thinking, what are the challenges he is facing, and if it comes directly from his mouth, it looks so much better. So like this, you can use some quotes, and you also ensure that there is no misrepresentation of data. That is very important here, because while working with interviewing people and getting things, and maybe even while paraphrasing or other things, when you are working with secondary sources, sometimes you may not really understand some of those things, and you may misrepresent data, which is, you have to be extra careful for that. So you have to eliminate all those possibilities. Now, one of the very important aspects while you are writing a case, or for that matter any papers, is that you have to avoid copyright conflicts. So you have to ensure that you are not infringing on any third party's copyrights. Particularly, this becomes particularly important when you are writing from a case from published sources. So you have to ensure that no sentence or part of the sentence should be copied directly from any particular source. So everything that you are writing on your own. So the structure and flow of the case should also not be similar to any other article or report that you are referring. So what you are essentially doing is you are just taking the information, but the language and the flow and the structure of the case, everything is yours. So even in parts also it should not resemble any other write-up. Other things that you can do to avoid copyright conflicts is that wherever possible you adapt the figures and try to present data in your own ways. So you provide citations and references for direct quotes that you are taking, any figures that you are using, any key opinion that is unique or controversial, you should be having a citation for that. You should, for any tables, figures or exhibits that you are using, you should be doing that. And you should take permission from copyright owners wherever it is required. Like there would be many articles and many publishers who would be specifically mentioning that you have to get that permission from them in written if you are using their content. So make sure that you are doing all this if you want to publish your case. Now another important issue here is increasing the useful life of the case. We have seen that there are many cases which are used for 1 year or so, but others that are used even after decades. Like there are some cases which are even 30 years old but still used in the class. Now that is because they have proved that they have a huge shelf life. They are very good cases and have developed into classic cases because they have been able to, they are still useful even today. So some of the things that you can do to increase the useful life of your case is by writing in the past tense, as we have discussed this before. Because if you look at articles and other things, they are more of a topical nature. So they may be of immediate interest. So as soon as you have a newspaper article or a magazine article, there the dates and other things are not as important because you know this is what it is and this is what is happening and that is how you are reading this and able to relate to it. But for a case, if you want that case to be relevant to even after 4 years, 5 years, 10 years or 20 years, the students have to relate to that, the readers have to relate to that, and that is best done if it is written in the past tense. Then you should also provide dates and periods liberally. So instead of using words like recently, today, tomorrow, this month, last month, next 5 years, next 10 years, you can always give the dates. So if you are liberal with your dates when you are writing the case, it makes it so much simpler for a student who is even reading it after a long time that the case has been written, to relate to it and you find it useful. So we have discussed quite a lot about how to write a case effectively. Now what I will do is I will take your questions one by one. So you please type in your questions through the chat mode and I will start taking those questions one by one. Okay, one of the questions coming in is how to write a case that is interesting and engaging. How to write a good story. Okay, we discussed about how it is important for a case to be a good story as well, and that is one way in which you can make your case really interesting and engaging. Now, one of the things that you can do here is you can follow the IDEA principle, AIDA. So A stands for attention, I for interest, D for desire, and A for action. So if you follow that kind of a situation, which is also used in many of the ads, I think you can write a good case. So at the very beginning, that is at the introduction, you try to hook the reader with something interesting. Maybe the interesting dilemma that is the focus of the case. Then you build the interest in the subsequent sections and ultimately lead it to there being some more desire in the reader to read further, and then ultimately at the end you are prompting them to for some action. That is how to solve it, how to solve the problem that you are presented in the case. So these are some of the things that you can develop. This can be honed with time. So I guess there's no other way of doing it other than starting and writing those writing those cases. Another question is, which topic do we normally will have long shelf life? Is it the concept or issue that can make a case to have a long shelf life? Okay. So is there any particular topics which can have a good shelf life? Yes, in some cases, yes. There are some topics which may be so unique that even after years, people find it interesting. So it can be one of the cases, but what will go on to remain as an interesting issue may not be immediately known to us when we are writing the cases. Sometimes we may have an hunch, but we cannot say for sure. So that is one thing maybe we don't have as much control over. But there are other things that we have control over, like how we are writing the case. So we may be writing many cases and thinking that the shelf life will be long, and it may not be the case, but we can always try. So we can try at least by writing it in a more friendly way, in the sense that you are writing it in the past tense, you are writing it in with dates and periods liberally, so that others can relate to it. So the next question is, are there any specific guidelines while gathering data from organization? I think this is one of the issues that we have discussed extensively in the second webinar. This is not related to the topic today. What you can do is you can go back to the second webinar's video, which is up. You can ask for that. I think it has been put up somewhere, and the link will be sent to you, and you can go through that. So the next question is, if a case has both dilemma and decision, what is the suggested breakup of length between the two contents? Okay. Now, I think most of the cases will have that. There would be a dilemma to be solved, and that is actually a result of the problem. So I think one section on the problem is enough. If you have one section, probably just after the introduction and the background information, and you introduce the problem there and then go by, I think that's fine. So one section will be enough for the problem, and even in the introduction also you will be talking about the problem, and at the end also you will be talking about the problem, and at the same time the dilemma faced by the organization. So the next question is, when there are multiple issues to be discussed in the case and teaching note, how to differentiate between the issues? See, a case may have multiple issues, so there is more the need that you are arranging it and structuring the case very well. So you have to really make decisions on what are the sections you are going to put up. So after the background information, when you are talking about the code issues, that part, you will have various sections and subsections, and you have to put it up logically there. So these are all case specific, so you have to make the decision there. But those are the places. That is, after the background and before the concluding part, you should have at least some sections, or if not a section, some subsections if they are dealing with similar issues, and you are covering those things. What are the best practices for writing a secondary case study? Okay. The best practices for writing a secondary case study, if you ask me, see, writing a case is same. So whatever we have discussed today, you can apply the same for writing your case from a published source. Only one thing that you have to be very careful while writing a case from a published source is that you have to really take care of those issues relating to copyright violations. So you have to see that there are no copyright infringements. You are writing it in your own words. You are just taking the information and you are having your own structure. You are referencing those information also well. And if there are any requirements for getting some permissions, you are getting those as well. And you are writing them in your own words. So that is very important when you are writing a case from secondary sources. So there is a question on, is there any limitation on the number of pages in writing a case? What is good, a short case or a long one? This is a very interesting question. What should be the optimum size of a case? Now, it all depends upon what you are trying to do with the case and how you can make it possible. How you can make it possible. So, if your objectives, your teaching objectives are met with a short case, why not go ahead with that? Because it will be easier to, it is more efficient. But if those cannot be met with a short case, there are certain topics which may not be, a short case may not be sufficient for that. So in those cases, you go for a longer case. So your objectives will determine whether it is going to be a short case or a longer case. Now, again, here one of the issues is, one of the things that some guidance that I can give here is that when you are writing a full-length case, if you can limit yourself to up to 15 pages, that's the best. That's I think that will be very good. You have some 10 to 12 pages of text and some another 5 pages of exhibits, or alternatively you can look at some 5,000 words or 6,000 words. I think that's fine for a full-length case. And if you think you can achieve it through a shorter case, go ahead and do that. That's fine, as long as your teaching objectives are met. How to write a case in past tense for something that is yet to take place? Okay, I have said that you need to write a case in the past tense. That is the generally accepted principle while writing a case. And now, there is no other way. You have to get used to it. You know, when I also started writing cases for the first time, I found it very difficult to write in the past tense. But over a period of time, you will get used to it. So even if you are writing something which is to happen in the future, like say the company is thinking of doing, coming up with a particular initiative in 2010, that also can be written. Like the company planned to come up with an initiative like this by 2020, okay, which is in the future. So you can write. It's just that you have to consciously put those things in the past tense and accept it. After a period of time, you will get used to it. So a very related question that has come up is that even while you are writing the footnote, should you be using past tense? Like the person who is questioning is saying that it becomes very confusing, especially when we have to describe company or allied people in a footnote. So whether in a footnote or not, when you are talking about people who are alive and you don't want to put it in the past tense, it is not about that. It is about what they have already done. So when you are writing a story, you can always use past tense. For some instances where it looks very wrong, then you can always use the present tense. It's not like a rigid rule etched in stone, but as far as possible, try to write in the past tense, because that's going to help you achieve your objective of having a case which can also extend the useful life of the case. So the next question is again a very interesting question. If we paraphrase well, I think we can avoid copyright conflicts. What do you think? Okay. Yes, paraphrasing is very important when you are writing a case from published sources, or if you are using some secondary information even when you are writing a field case. Paraphrasing is very important but at the same time you should not only rely on paraphrasing alone. You have to see that if you take a paragraph from somewhere and you just paraphrase it, that's probably not enough. So you have to see that you are just taking the information, you are referencing them, even if you are paraphrasing them, if you are taking some important information, and the flow is yours. That is most important. The structure and flow of the case is yours, not of any other, and it should not resemble any other third-party material. Another question that has come up is, what part of the case structure should the dilemma be introduced? Oh, that's very simple. You know, you have to introduce the dilemma as soon as possible, because that will give the reader an idea about what they are up against. So it should be there in the introduction, very beginning in the introduction, and then again everything that you are putting in is based on that. So at the end again you bring it up with some little more information and with all the associated issues and pose it to the student. Another interesting question, should all cases have a dilemma? Okay, all cases may not have a dilemma, but there will be some issues that the case will be focused on. It is very important that the case is focused on some issues. It may be a challenge, it may be a opportunity, but some issues have to be there. Without that, you don't have a case. So you may not have an explicit dilemma in a case always, but it may be implicit. Like sometimes when you are discussing some opportunity, also their dilemmas may come up, follow-up dilemmas may come up. So it may be implicit in the case, but without that you don't have a case at all. So it is very important, particularly when you are writing a teaching case. So another question, we are having a lot of questions, so I will be fast and brief. Can each section dealing with a particular issue have its own timeline, or we have to follow the same timeline throughout various sections? I guess what you are trying to ask is whether the case should follow some timeline. Yeah, it is very important that your case follows some kind of a timeline so that students can relate to it. At least it has to be very clear to the writer. It has to be very clear to the writer that what the timeline is. Then you can play with the information here and there to make it more engaging. But if the timeline is not clear to the author, then there will be a problem. Otherwise, you have the leverage to work around with the timeline as long you are able to engage the student with how you are presenting your data. If you are not sure, try to maintain the timeline. Go chronologically as far as possible. So what is the optimum number of references that should be there in a case? Now here again it is case specific. If you are using some 50 or 70 or 100 sources for writing your case, you have to give exactly what you are referring. So it depends on the case, not on some numbers that are there. But if you are asking how many you should refer, and if you are like writing it from some published sources or something, probably you should refer more than 70 to 100 articles in the list. A question, can we write a case on mental disorder patient because my background is in clinical psychology? How? Now, you know, if you think there is some learning, it is not about writing a case for the sake of writing a case. It is about writing a case to achieve some learning objectives. Now, if you think you can write a case which will have some learnings for students, some theoretical concepts can be taught, some and things like that, it meets your teaching objectives, then you can always go ahead and do that. And I have given the go ahead here. If you want something, if you wanted that from me, rest what you are going to do, that is up to you. You know how to structure a case. Now you know what are the contents of a case, and based on your case you have to write that, and then also to meet your specific teaching objectives. But not just for writing a case. There has to be specific teaching objectives for that. Who all can be considered for providing multiple perspectives in a case? Again, a very interesting question. Whose perspectives are you going to take? Now, for that will again depend on the case, but if we want to talk generically also, if there is a protagonist, his perspective is very important. There may be other members in his team, those people's perspective are important. The CEO's perspective may be important. The workers, if it deals with workers, those people's perspective may be important. If it deals with other stakeholders, like even investors, and it is relevant to the case, those may be important. If they deal with activists outside the organization, there are activists or something, and your case deals with them, there is some interplay, their perspective is also important. What the analysts think about the company and specific to the case that you are developing, that is important. Some critics may have their own perspective, so those are also important. So based on your teaching objectives and the case that you are writing, you will decide which are the perspectives that you have to tap and weave into your case. We are getting some very interesting questions. Another question is, how can we integrate theory and concepts into a case? Now, integrating theory and concepts. Now, when you are writing a teaching note, that is where the theories and concepts will come in. But if you don't know those, you will not know what kind of information you have to put in the case. So, you may not be putting those theories into the case as such, or trying to explain things using those concepts in the case. So, that is for the teaching note. But whatever relevant information that will be used to analyze the case using some frameworks or try to explain based on some facts in the case, those facts at least has to be in the case. So that's how you integrate it. The integration comes when you are writing the case and the teaching note, and that is where you talk about integrity. But in the case itself, there will be only the facts, the opinions, and the story and the dilemma. But you have to make sure that these are sufficient for anyone to analyze the case using some frameworks or some theory or apply some concepts. Okay, can I alter some facts of the case to make it more interesting? Now this is a very critical question. So you have your information and you are thinking whether you can make some alterations in that, whatever you have collected, to make your case more interesting. I think many case writers who are very experienced do some of these things to some extent, because with experience they know how much to alter the facts. So because what we are interested in with the teaching case is not, we are not looking after the truth, we are not looking for the truth or something. What we are looking for is how to give the best, how to teach some concepts in the class. So for if it is enabled by some small alteration here or there, sometimes it is okay. But for that it requires a person to be really experienced to do that. Or sometimes it may so happen that you want to focus your case in one direction only. You don't want something else to be discussed. So you can shut up those information, though in reality there may be some action warranted in those areas also, but you are intentionally not showing this in the case because you don't want any discussion on those aspects. So in some ways you are altering the facts of the situation, but that's acceptable as long as it goes towards achieving your objectives of writing the case. I think we have just 2 more questions to go. So how will I write a case if I am preparing my case from secondary sources and I cannot clearly identify a protagonist? Okay, so when you are writing a case from primary sources, you are interviewing the protagonist and you know who they are, and if they agree to be cast in that way, you can always do that. But when you are writing with published sources, sometimes that may be a problem. And if you are not able to do it also, it's not a great problem, as you are writing this case because you think that your students can learn something from it. So even if you don't have a protagonist, clearly identified protagonist, you can still write the case, you can highlight the dilemma, you can highlight the issues, and there can be discussion on those which students can learn from. So no problems there as such. So we have come to the last question today, and I have the question goes like this: I have collected a lot of interesting information, and now I don't know what to leave out, as they all seem important to me. What should I do? Yeah. So I think this is something that many of the people who have written case studies know about. So you have collected information. It is not the easiest thing to do an exhaustive information search and get all the information. But since you have got a lot of information, there is always the temptation that I should put all those in the case. And to me, everything is important, seems important. So one thing that you can do is you should look at your teaching objectives very specifically and say, okay, is this information really required for me for answering this particular, like for achieving this particular objective? Like this, you can use your objectives as a checklist and see that for each section of information whether you really require it or not. Because you cannot have a case which is also unwieldy in the sense that it is too big, too lopsided, and having all kind of information, because you will lose the focus then. So your objectives will let you focus and you can do a good job there. So thank you very much. We have had a nice interaction, I hope, because I enjoyed it a lot. The questions were really interesting. So that leaves us with just one more webinar to go. I hope you are making progress with your cases, and I look forward to seeing them soon. Very important topic is coming up on June 16, how to write a robust teaching note. Now, many of the things will be much clearer there. So if you have already made some progress in writing the case, I think you will find that that particular webinar very useful. So till then, have a nice day. Thank you very much.